Well, good morning, everyone. It's just so good to be with the Humeridge family again this morning. I often come with very low self-esteem, but I'm feeling good now. But I also knew that David Milliken would sort that out because he's already whispered to my wife that pride goeth before a fall. Thanks, Dave. I knew I could count on you. It's a tremendous privilege to be here. As usual, though, my family have deserted me and gone on holidays. This seems to happen every year, so a shout out to the Davidsons and Shepherds and Fewellings who are all at Bribey Island, maybe watching in, supporting from a distance, I'm sure. When I asked Ross for possible topics this morning, he immediately suggested, why don't you talk about why bother with church? I'm guessing that he thought getting someone from outside of HR tackle this topic might work really well, because prophets in their own home church are often not given the due honour. I reckon I've attended about 4,000 to 5,000 church services in my so far 70 years. I know I don't forget that. Growing up in Gatton, Sundays followed a very predictable pattern, and some of you older ones will relate to this, I'm sure. Sunday school at 9 a.m, followed by a service at 10:30 a.m, which seemed to go on forever. And then we'd go home and we'd have a roast lunch that Mum had prepared, and then we'd have the mandatory afternoon nap, a habit I just hated as a kid and now I pursue with religious zeal. And then we would go for an afternoon drive and catch up with friends, but always back in time for a quick dinner and then out to the 7:30 service. There were only two variations to that pattern. Occasionally we'd come up to Toowoomba to visit my grandparents, and then we'd go and have tea at Auntie Betty and Uncle Gordon's place. Apple pie, scones and cream, lemon sugar pipelets. I can't quite remember them, but apparently they were good. Critically though, what that meant was that we would be too late to get home for the evening service, and that was a terrible shame. And the other variation was on holidays. There'd always be this earnest discussion whether or not we would go to church on a Sunday on holidays, and Dad would always want us to head to the local Baptist church. And Mum was generally more reluctant. Dad could be very stubborn. So we worked on Mum. It's only once a year, Mum. Dad always says that a change is as good as a holiday. And that real clincher, we can have more family time. Yeah, well, anyway. Nevertheless, Sunday worship has become a habit of mine for the last 50 plus years since I left the influence of Mum and Dad, and I am eternally thankful to them for setting me that example. Jamie Smith writes this: your deepest desire is the one manifested by your daily life and habits. This is because our action, our doing, bubbles up from our loves, which are habits we've acquired through the practices we're immersed in. Our habits reveal our deepest desires, the things we love, our priorities, our motivations. So if I'm a gym junkie, clearly not, fitness would be the priority that perhaps I've got, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it might also be that my whole identity is so tied up in my looks and having those fabulous Ross Saville type abs that I've missed the point. Of course, long working hours might be an indication that I'm a really diligent and committed employee and want the best for the company, and there's nothing wrong with that either. That's my habit. But it could be that it's actually about escaping my family responsibilities or sorting out a difficult relationship. If I'm constantly scrolling and swiping through social media apps, it could be because I just want to stay connected. I want to know what's happening in my friends' lives so that I can care for them. Nothing wrong with that either. But it could be that I'm trying to escape reality, or that I'm curating some sort of identity that disguises the real me. So remember, your deepest desire is the one manifested by your daily life and habits. My habits reveal what my priorities are, the things that I treasure. So, Why bother with the habit of attending church? This feels like a bit preaching to the converted this morning, but hang in there with me, all right? Why should I make 9 a.m. here at Humeridge a priority on a Sunday? Or joining us on Zoom? Interestingly, this is not a new issue for Christians. And in the letter to the Hebrews, we read these words: "And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. And all the more as we see the day approaching." Clearly, 2,000 years ago, some folks found getting together with other Christians either a bit of a chore, or maybe it was even a bit dangerous. Whatever the reason, they'd actually developed a habit of not getting together with other believers. And as a result, according to the Hebrews writer, they're just missing out on the encouragement that they would come. We'll come back to those verses a little bit later. But I want to be really clear this morning that my intention is not to send you all out of the doors with an enormous guilt trip, making New Year's resolutions that you're going to come to church more often, etc. All right? That's not the point of this. I hope that I can help you see that gathering with other Christians is not so much something that you must do, but something that you would want to do. This is not about, to use the colloquial phrase, bums on seats and boosting the statistics. So, Ross, is your salary tied to bums? No, probably not. Okay. So it's not about that. It is about reframing the question from why bother to can I afford to miss out? So I got 4 reasons why I reckon we should nurture the habit of regular church attendance. But I want to first just clarify a little bit what I mean by church. Now, you know that church, of course, is not this building. However, I think when we say we're going to church today, mentally, we've got in mind a specific location. You've got in mind, 416 Hume Street, this building. But the church, of course, is actually you. It's the people of God. It's a community that you join. The building here is just some sort of convenient place for a community of believers to meet. The Greek word that's usually translated as church in the New Testament is ecclesia, and it simply means gathering. You'll find that there are some translations that don't use the word church. They actually say assembly. In Acts 19, there's an interesting passage where the silversmith Demetrius stirs up the local Ephesians because they were losing business, because people are shifting their allegiance from the goddess Artemis to the Messiah Jesus, and he can't sell all the silver stuff that he usually does. And Luke records the assembly, and the word there is ecclesia, was in confusion. Some were shouting one thing, some another. Most of the people didn't even know why they were there. Sounds like a church member. Sorry, stop, moving on. So here's a group of people, not Christians, but they're called an ecclesia. You wouldn't translate that as a church, would you? So it simply means an assembly or a gathering. So this morning, I think what we're really asking is, why should Christians bother gathering together? And in my head this morning, I'm sort of focusing on this event, if you want to call it that, this Sunday morning gathering, Sunday morning assembly. But you also gather in other times, don't you? In your life groups, in some mob called the Grumpos, I don't know what that's about, KYBs, your youth groups, whenever 2 or 3 are gathered. It could just as easily be in different places. It could be this building or in your homes, or maybe some folks in a school, dare I say it, a local pub or a park. So I'll leave it to you to think about how these reasons I give might apply to some of those other settings, but I've got in mind what we're doing right now. So my first reason for gathering is that it's a time to look up. It's a time to get together to worship God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's the main reason, and it's come through so much in what we've done already together today. Everything we do in this time should be geared towards bringing God the praise and the honour he deserved. When Francis Chan gave a keynote address at a big conference, he got up and he started by asking the audience, how are you feeling? Have you enjoyed your time? Did the prayers lift you up? Did you like the songs? Are you pleased to be here with other believers? And I'm imagining that in the audience there were plenty of nods and amens and go brother and all that. And we could ask ourselves the same questions this morning, couldn't we? How's this service going for you today? Are you enjoying it? Are you pleased that you came? But then Francis Chan made this statement. Friends, the critical question is this: is God pleased with our worship? Is God pleased with us gathering here on the first Sunday in 2025 at Hume Ridge? And that's a bit in your face, isn't it? Because we sort of take it for granted that God will just be happy that we bothered to turn up. Of course God will be pleased with us. I want to say to you, friends, that we don't do God a favour by simply rolling out of bed on a Sunday morning and dragging ourselves off to a worship service. It's a grace. It's a gift for us to be here. Some years ago, Ross came and spoke at our church over there at TCBC. And he read this passage from Amos, and it stuck with me. It's from the Message version, which really makes it hit, doesn't it, Ross? Amos wrote this, God saying, I can't stand your religious meetings. I'm fed up with your conferences and conventions. I want nothing to do with your religious projects, your pretentious slogans and goals. I'm sick of your fundraising schemes, your public relations and image making. I've had all I can take of your noisy ego music. Now I've offended most people at Hume Ridge, but that's all right. When was the last time you sang to me? Do you know what I want? I want justice, oceans of it. I want fairness, rivers of us. That's what I want. That's all I want. Doesn't sound to me like God is particularly interested in whether or not I leave this building this morning with a warm, fuzzy feeling. Friends, the foremost reason for us to gathering this morning is because we come before a holy God to bring him praise and honour, to come and confess our sinfulness and our unworthiness, and to be just embraced by his grace and his mercy and love. We gather together to recognise his presence and acknowledge that we are totally dependent on him in every aspect of our lives. Now, when the Jewish pilgrims travelled to Jerusalem for festivals like Passover and Pentecost and Tabernacles, they used to sing psalms of ascent. The psalms number 120 to 134. You can look them up later. And as they went, those songs reminded them of the profound spiritual truths and their identity as God's people. And it helped them to prepare as they headed up to the foothills of Jerusalem, to the holy city, the city of David, Zion. And as they walked, someone would start singing, perhaps Psalm 130, for example. And I'm going to get you to do this morning. You weren't expecting that, were you? I'm going to get you to stand, if you're able, and we'll say this psalm together. I want the people on my right-hand side, that's you lot. This is my right, isn't it? Yep, got that. You're going to say the words that are in white, and you people are going to say the words that are in non-white, yellow, whatever. And I want you to stand, and we're going to recite this psalm, and I want you in your mind's eye to imagine that you're walking up that hill towards Jerusalem. Imagine that you're on this dusty road. The harvest is finished. The livestock have been sorted. Maybe someone's been left behind to look after them. And there is this excitement as you join with thousands of other pilgrims trudging up to Jerusalem to celebrate Pentecost. Got the idea? Now, I'll tell you when to stand. Ross is just about jumping out of his seat there. He's so excited. Now, some people are very clever. They can read and look. Okay, so if you're very brave and you're not English and you're not Baptist, turn and look at other people, all right? And look across the aisle as if you were telling them these great truths of God. You've got the picture? All right, so let's stand. And these people are going to start. Are you ready? And feel free to look across, eyeball someone and tell them these great truths as you're walking up to Jerusalem. That's what you're thinking about. Are we all good? All right, no one's deserted yet. Okay, would you like Ross, lead us away. Out of the depths I cry to you. Hear my voice. I mucked that up. Next slide. We were waiting. Ready? 1, 2. I wait for the Lord. More than watchmen, wait for the morning. More than watchmen, wait for the morning. Have a seat. What did you like? I love the bit about he doesn't keep a record of my sins. My goodness, isn't that good to know? So well done. And something in that psalm might have twigged with you that you can share with others over a cup of tea. So first of all, we look up. Second thing, reason for gathering with other believers and why we should make this a priority is because it's an opportunity for us to look back and remember the story that we're in. You know, throughout Scripture, it's really clear that God's people suffer from some sort of spiritual amnesia, spiritual dementia. Because over and over again, you see these cycles of forgetfulness, you know? They get themselves in a pickle, God rescues them, life goes on, but then they quickly forget all the things He's done for them and that He requires of them, and then the whole cycle gets repeated. You can read in Deuteronomy 4, this is after they've come out of Egypt, then Moses says to them, look, only take heed and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. And teach them to your children and grandchildren. Pass it on. And a little later in Deuteronomy, he even predicts that this is actually going to happen when they reach the promised land. He says, be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe His commands, His laws, His decrees that I'm giving you today. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses, when your herds and flocks grow large and your silver and gold increase, then your heart will become proud and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. And if you go further into the Old Testament, it's Psalm 78, it's the second longest psalm in the Bible, because it traces the history of their forgetfulness right from Moses right through to David. Get a glimpse of it in verses 11 and 12. They forgot His works and the wonders that He'd done for showing them. Marvellous things He had done in the sight of their fathers in the land of Egypt, in the land of Zion. Over and over again, they forget God, His commands, His amazing acts of redemption and rescue, His protection and His provision for them. And it's as though God, knowing the tendency of His people towards spiritual amnesia, God gives them all sorts of memory aids. So they've got the stories to tell each other. They've got the tabernacle and the temple. They've got this annual calendar of festivals and feasts and sacrifices, so that it'll help them to recall all of God's gracious interventions over time, and so they can pass this on from one generation to another. But you know, spiritual amnesia didn't suddenly disappear when Jesus came. And I suspect that Jesus knew that. And so He institutes for us what we've done this morning, communion, to help us to remember. This is my body which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. This cup is a new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. Communion is essentially an act of remembering, just as we've done today. And I love the way Ross reminded us that it's actually a time for us to remember that God has remembered us. Wonderful. But there are many reasons why we so easily forget. We're human. In my case, we're old. We're sinful. We're rebellious. We don't put the time aside to intentionally remember what God and His goodness. But I think one of the reasons that we're often not aware of is that from Monday to Saturday, we are bombarded with different stories of reality, different versions of truth and what matters. These things come to us through what we read, what we see, the conversations we have, and of course, social media. So I'll give you one example. It's what the academics call expressive individualism. And Brian Rossner has a book called How to Find Yourself, highly recommended. And he gives a series of sort of aspects of expressive individualism. So for example, it's a belief that the best way for you to find yourself is to look inward. Look within yourself. What feels right for you? Secondly, it's a belief that our highest goal, the thing that we could most aspire to, is our own personal happiness. Don't worry, be happy. Do whatever you want to do as long as you're happy and you don't hurt anyone else. It's all about you. It's a third one there, it's a belief that we're entitled to our own opinion. There's no right or wrong, there's just a series of personal preferences. You do you, I'll do me. That's the way it works. I want you to compare that with the Apostle Paul's advice to the Romans. Romans 12, very familiar passage. I'm reading from the Message again. Paul writes this, "So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, and going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering." See what Paul's saying? You want to find your true self, your true identity? Well, give your whole life to pursuing Him, because that's where you'll find your true identity. Not by looking inward, but by looking to God. Next bit, embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. There's your goal, there's your purpose, not some sort of self-absorbed search for illusory happiness, here one day and gone the next. It is making God's purposes your priority, living every day your ordinary life in pursuit of your service to Him and to His people. And then the last part of that little passage. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. Very old translation, J.B. Phillips says, "Don't let the world squeeze you into its own mould." Friends, if you're a follower of Jesus, you are called to live differently, to live counterculturally, to live in the world but not be shaped by the world. We're to be shaped by the Holy Spirit. We're to live in a different story. So when we gather on Sunday mornings, we get to be restoried so that we can head back into the rest of the week reminded of our true identity, our true purpose. And in our service today, in jotting things down as we go, we've been reminded of the sufficiency of God's grace in all of life's circumstances. We've been reminded that our chains are gone and that our debt is paid through the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. We've brought our individual and corporate needs to God in prayer, knowing that He cares for us. And I've already mentioned Ross's thing, that God remembers us. Even though we don't remember Him too well, He remembers us when we most needed it. Okay, third point. Thirdly, gathering is an opportunity to look after one another. You know that phrase, one another, occurs something like more than 50 times in the New Testament. So that in the face of persecution and just ups and downs of daily living, and just, I guess, getting to know each other as followers of Jesus, this is a whole weird new experience. The early Christians needed to learn to love and to encourage and care for one another. The fact that looking after one another is mentioned so often tells me that it's not easy. It's probably not natural. You have to be intentional. Folks, I don't know if you've noticed, but there are some very strange people that come to Humeridge Church of Christ. There's some really strange ones. They come with baggage. I'm not even just talking about the pastors, okay? They come with baggage, they come with different backgrounds, they come with behaviours that mightn't sit well with us. It's actually going to take real effort for you guys to look after one another. Obvious it wasn't easy, but we're encouraged to do it. And look, here's just some examples from Paul's letters. So when he wrote to the Philippians, remember when Paul writes this stuff, he's writing because there was a reason to write it. Does that make sense? There was something happening in that church that made him write these things. So he wrote to them, he said, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. The opposite must have happened in the Philippian church for him to write that. To the Colossian church, he said, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Must have been a bit of a problem with forgiveness happening in Colossae. To the Romans, he said, be devoted to one another in love. Honour one another above yourselves. That would have been a bit countercultural in a Roman church, hey? Think about it. And we saw in that Hebrews passage earlier, let us consider how we should spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. And you'll know, this is sermons for another day, that Paul uses the metaphor of the body to help us to grasp our interdependence, our unity in diversity, and how each one of us is called to use our God-given gifts to help to build the body and to mature. Now, I'm going out on a limb here, but some of you may know this show on TV called The Repair Shop. Just help me out. They'll all be over. Yeah, thank you. As predictable. The Repair Shop. And at this show, each week, people bring along items that are of great sentimental value to them. They've seen better days. And they come wondering if these special treasures can be restored to their former glory. Everything from piano accordions to teddy bears, lots of teddy bears. What have you seen? I'm trying to remember some more. That'll do. What was it? Bicycles. Yeah, owned by 5 generations back, you know. And you know, in each episode of The Repair Shop, the staff there lovingly and skillfully bring these treasures back to life. For some people, their specialty is teddy bears. For some people, it's bicycles, and other people's it's piano accordions. And then at the end of the show, the owner and the object are reunited, and there's tears and there's thanks, and it's very heartwarming, for me anyway. Do you know, I reckon Paul was writing today, he might write that the church is a bit like a repair shop. At some point or other, you know, every one of us brings our broken and our tattered lives in for repair. Past hurts, regrets, disappointments, struggles. We all need fixing in some way or another. And as we pray for one another, as we listen to one another, as we love one another, maybe even sometimes as we say some hard words to one another, God brings his healing and his hope. Now, I know that you know what I mean here at Hume Ridge. I spotted this on the back of some of the youth group at the recent youth camp. It says, look out for the left out. Paul would have liked that phrase, I reckon. So keep doing it, friends. Spur one another on, encourage one another, and look after one another when you get together. Finally, you'll be glad. Gathering is an opportunity to look out, to look beyond the 4 walls of this building and to see a world that is in great need. William Temple, a former Archbishop of Canterbury, was famously said this: the church is the only society that exists for the benefit of those who are not its members. Many of you will be familiar with this image that's going to come up on the screen. It's one of my favourites. So it captures a bit of the heart of what I want to say to you. Each week we gather, like the little red dots in the corner, so that in our times of worship and singing and learning and praying, we're actually given a vision of what it could be like, and we're actually empowered to live out the gospel in coming days in our everyday, ordinary lives, our sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around lives. Here's again, back to Jamie Smith, an author you may have gathered I really like. He writes these: worship works from the top down, you might say. In worship, we just don't come to show God our devotion and give him our praise. We certainly do that. We are called to worship because in this encounter, God remakes and moulds us top down. Worship is the arena in which God recalibrates our hearts, reforms our desires, and rehabituates our loves. Worship isn't just something we do, it is where God does something to us. Worship is the heart of discipleship because it is the gymnasium in which God retrains our hearts. So friends, this morning, you've been to a gym session. You've been to a gym session where God has been reshaping and remoulding and reminding you of the things that are important. And so now we're ready to go out to our Monday to Saturday frontlines to bring God's love and grace to the friends and family we have who don't know Jesus. And so I'm hoping and praying that our time together for you today has not been a bother or a chore, but rather it has been a time out to worship together and to be reminded of some great truths that should shape our lives. As you head out for a cuppa shortly, it's an opportunity to look after one another, to pray together, to bear one another's burdens. And it's not always easy, but we go with confidence knowing that God goes ahead of us, that he goes with us every moment of every day. And while we may forget him, he never forgets us. We'll just pause and pray. Band's going to come and lead us in a song. I was just to take time of quiet this morning, just to think back over those 4 points and maybe which one of those is highlighted as for you a reason for joining with your brothers and sisters in Christ here on a Sunday morning, making that a priority and a habit in your life. Is it to look up maybe, to look back, to look after, to look out? Just spend a moment in quiet and then the team will lead us in a wonderful song.